There are critical elections going on across the country all the time. Tomorrow, Wisconsin has a big one, a couple big ones. Joining me now to talk about that and other things, Parker Thayer, investigative researcher, Capital Research. Okay, Parker, before we go into what's going on in Wisconsin, why don't you give us a little backstory on ZuckerBucks? What are you talking about?
Yeah, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 4 years, you've probably heard the word ZuckBucks before. In the 2020 election, billionaire Mark Zuckerberg decided that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, he needed to provide about $400 million worth of private funding to public election offices to help them administer the election. There's been a lot of research conducted that's shown that this funding was distributed in a wildly partisan manner, overwhelmingly favoring heavily demographic districts, highly populated ones, and was used to boost the turnout in a way that affected the outcome of the election through the election offices that are supposed to be administering them. Wisconsin had a particularly disgusting display by ZuckBucks. Multiple county clerks resigned, or city clerks resigned, over the overbearing use of these funds, which they considered to be improper, and the overbearing influence of CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, grant administrators, which were highly involved in the conducting of the election and even had the keys to the room where ballots were stored. Now, Wisconsin has a ballot question coming up on a constitutional amendment to ban ZuckBucks in the future.
Okay, so what specifically were the ZuckBucks being used for that could get that many people to resign? It must have been pretty bad. What explain it to me like I'm stupid.
Well, what they said it was for personal protective equipment and to make sure that no one got COVID while administering an election. $400 million sounds a bit high to do just that and buy masks and protective equipment. What it was actually used for was conducting large, basically get out the vote campaigns, informing voters of how to vote by mail, how to request ballots, where to send them, where drop boxes were, text campaigns to make sure that they did all of those things. It was not something that the election offices really should be doing, especially not when it's being paid for by a private billionaire donor.
Okay, now what's on the ballot for tomorrow with the constitutional amendment? I doubt it has Mark Zuckerberg's name in there. Is it no outside group is ever allowed to what does it say?
Precisely. It says that no outside group, county election officials, city election officials, state election officials will not be allowed to request or use private funding in the administering of elections in the future. Now, the Wisconsin House and Senate both passed a piece of legislation that would have done exactly this, but Wisconsin's Democratic governor decided to veto that bill. Then the House and Senate reconvened and decided to create a constitutional amendment referendum, which will now be going live. And even as they vote on this referendum in the 2024 election, a group called Cities Forward, not CTCL and not ZuckBucks, is planning to do a similar thing with a $750,000 grant to the city of Milwaukee. Even as voters in Wisconsin will be deciding whether private funding will be allowed to be used in election offices, private funding is already on the way to election offices.
Parker, I've sadly, I try not to be a cynic, but I've sadly come to expect losses in these kind of non-sexy races. I think back to the Ohio abortion constitutional amendment. The truth is Democrats do blocking and tackling. Republicans put bumper stickers on their cars. Are we seeing any kind of movement on the Republican side when it comes to this specific, very important race in this critical swing state?
I can't speak to what's going on in this particular election. I do know, though, that 27 states around the country have now banned ZuckBucks. This is an extremely popular issue for voters. It's a common sense issue. And I hope that common sense prevails.
All right. Let's talk about a story you've come on and talked about in the past for us, charities. Charities, nonprofits, that get involved in elections when they're not supposed to be getting involved in elections. Do you have any updates on that?
Yeah, I mean, for example, the organization that I mentioned that's sending $750,000 to the city of Milwaukee, or planning to, for the 2024 election, That's one of those classic nonpartisan charities, which its name is Cities Forward, and it claims that it just cares so much about civic participation that it's going to make sure that civic participation happens through election offices in only cities, which just so happen to be overwhelmingly Democrat. I mean, these nonprofits are overwhelmingly active. They're extremely powerful. They're probably the Democratic Party's super weapon in electioneering cycles, and you can expect that Cities Forward, maybe even the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and the nonpartisan Get Out the Vote industry, which is all operated through tech-exempt charities, will be highly active in 2024, particularly in Wisconsin.
Yeah,